Yes, I spent 31 years with Schneider Electric and spent a lot of time trying to look into smart cities and what is really, challenging us moving forward, which will hopefully I'll bring in the discussion here in a positive way that helps really bring out some of the relevant issues. On the panel here, I have Heather Bailey, who's the Executive Director of Energy Strategy, and she's got a few other things following on in that title, along with trying to develop the energy utility in the city of Boulder. And also have Michael Shuman, who has written numerous books, 10 I hear, around localizing the economy and empowering the local business development within communities. Is this thing breaking up a little bit? Okay. I don't know if it's me or... Okay. Okay. So we're going to do a quick little presentation just to kind of give everybody a background of what Michael and Heather have been working on, and then we'll move into kind of a discussion around the topics and what some of the opportunities are. Michael?
Okay, great. So my mission is to give you a sort of 7-minute orientation about the universe of local economy building. And one thing to think about, when you think in terms of sustainability and you go back to where the word really got popularized through the Brundtland Commission a generation ago, and the definition of sustainability was to meet the needs of current generations without impairing your ability to meet the needs of future generations. And the problem with that definition, among many things, was that it had no position for place. It didn't take into account community. And for me, a much better definition of sustainability that puts local economies front and center is you meet the needs of your community, present and future, without impairing the ability of other communities to meet their needs, present and future. And that puts the emphasis on local self-reliance and local business. But that's just sustainability, and we are talking about regeneration. So part of what I think is great about the concept of regeneration is thinking of your community and everything you do to move towards self-reliance as being a model that can be shared with other communities and helping them to reach their self-reliance. And they likewise are sharing with you. Now the good news is that all of this makes enormous economic sense, because we know that local businesses are far superior in terms of their economic development impact than non-local businesses. Couple of things about local businesses. More than half of our economy is made up of locally owned business. In fact, by some tallies, it's as much as 80%. So the non-local businesses represent the minority position of the economy. This study here was done out of British Columbia a couple of years ago, and what it shows is the impact of $1 spent at local restaurants and retailers. And if I can go up here for a second, $1 spent in the independents leads to 48 cents recycling in the economy, whereas $1 spent at chain restaurant and retailers leads to a recycling of about 17 cents. So roughly speaking, every time a British Columbian resident mindfully spends $1 at a locally owned restaurant and retailer, the province experiences 2.5 times the jobs, 2.5 times the income and wealth effects, 2.5 times the tax collections, 2.5 times the charitable contributions. We are not talking about small degrees of difference. And there has been about 24 of these studies done over the last 15 years. I've done a few of them myself. They compare the impact of 2 similar businesses or 2 industries, one locally owned, one not. And every single one of them has shown that the local businesses generate 2 to 4 times the jobs and other economic development impacts as the non-local businesses. But don't take my word for it. This is from the Harvard Business Review in the summer of 2010. The title is More Small Firms Means More Jobs. And it's a regression analysis of localities across the United States. And what it shows is those communities with the highest density of locally owned business have the highest per capita job growth rate. But not just that, but this study from the Federal Reserve in Atlanta in 2013, different regression analysis of counties, shows that those counties with the highest density of locally owned business have the highest per capita income growth rate. So in other words, if your goal is to raise family incomes and lower poverty, having a density of locally owned business is your ticket for doing so. So out of these ideas, I have sort of come up with a template of 6 Ps about how you build local economies. So this is sort of the big picture, and as our hour unfolds, we'll get into some of these in more depth. But it involves planning, people, partners, purchasing, and policy making. Planning means look at leaks in your economy. All the places where people are unnecessarily purchasing outside goods and services or investing in outside companies. People, how do you support a new generation of leak-plugging entrepreneurs? Partners, how do you create networks of local business that are more competitive as a team than they would be on their own? Purse, how do you harness local savings, whether short-term savings in banks or long-term savings in pension funds, and put them to work in locally owned business? Purchasing, how do you spearhead buy local or think local first campaigns? And policy making, I happen to be a policy minimalist. We can talk about what that means later on. But I have one overriding goal for public policy, which is stop destroying local business. Stop subsidizing the non-local business competition, which ruins the source of economic development. Right now, state and local governments, including your state in Colorado, are systematically investing in non-local business and all kinds of incentives, and it's entirely counterproductive. As we heard in the last panel, if you had to pick one of these issues to lean into, it is capital. Capital is the single biggest challenge of growing local economies. And frankly, the biggest part of this problem is you. So some of you have heard me do this before, but don't give it away. I just want to ask a couple of questions. By show of hands, how many people here have mindfully bought something locally over the last week? All right, you wouldn't be here otherwise. Next question. We know that money that's put on deposit in local banks or credit unions is 3 times more likely to find its way into the hands of local business than money put on deposit at something like Bank of America. So how many of you do your banking at a local bank or credit union? That is a great showing. Last question, those of you with pension funds, which is probably most of you in this room, how many of you put at least 1% into locally owned business? Okay, this is the problem. Here are you folks, the biggest locavores in Colorado and arguably in the United States, and you're systematically over-investing in Fortune 500 companies and under-investing, frankly not investing at all, in locally owned business. You are the problem. And if we could fix this problem, there would be a shift of $25 trillion at least from Wall Street to Main Street. That number, by the way, assumes that only half the economy is locally owned, because right now if you add up all of the financial assets that we have out there, households have out there, in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, pension funds, insurance funds, it's $50 trillion. So if we moved half of that money from Wall Street to the local or more half of the economy, that would be a $25 trillion shift. That, as they say in Washington, is serious money. I will stop there and hand it over to my colleague to share what she is doing.
Good morning. How are y'all? How many of you are from Boulder or live in Boulder? Okay, good. Not everybody. And the reason I ask that is because my first slide really talks a little bit in that beautiful picture. This is why we live here. This is just a gorgeous place to live. Truth be told, I'm from Texas. And I know some of y'all couldn't tell. But I've been here for 5 years, and I love this place. It's amazing, and that's a big reason why. But a little bit about Boulder. For those of you that aren't here, this is an amazing community, and the fact that we're having a conversation like this here in Boulder tells you a lot about the type of people that are here. We've got about a little over 100,000 people, and for good or bad, it looks like we're still continuing to grow a little bit, if not in population and jobs. And that can be a good thing, depending on the type of jobs they are. We have 45,000 housing units, and the reason this is important is that over half of those housing units are rented, and the other half are owned, a little bit less than half. This gets to some important things I'll talk about in a minute when it comes to energy. We have 100,000 jobs, and from what I understand, about half of those jobs are in commuters into the community. Transportation implications right there. Very low unemployment rate. The thing that is unique, I think, about Boulder, well, a couple of things. There's a lot of things that are unique about Boulder. It's one of the top cities to start a business. And I bet, how many of you in this room have started a business? Yep, this is Boulder. And this is a very unusual statistic. It tells you a lot about the community. It is also probably one of the smartest towns I've ever lived in. And I came from Austin, Texas, so there are a lot of smart people there. But Boulder is full of a lot of creative, smart people. That makes us unique. But that also makes us very thoughtful in ways that you don't see in other communities. And we have the luxury of thinking about things that we haven't thought about before. We also have a very high turnout when we vote. And you all take government very seriously, which is where I work. So that's sort of, I'm putting this in context because I'm going to talk about energy and what it means to have an impact on the local economy through energy. And Boulder's a great example of that. So we hear a lot on the national level about the clean energy economy and how moving towards clean energy really will make a difference in the rest of the world. But what I also hear is from folks both in and outside of Boulder that, you know, Boulder's so small, how can you possibly make an impact on the rest of the world? You know, this isn't where the rest of the world's going. Well, if you listen very closely, it is where the rest of the world's going. And what I want to talk about is from a government perspective, and I'm going to counter what you said a minute ago. Government can play a very key role, and it's in setting policy and providing some financial incentives, getting back to the purse strings. I don't think government should be the business. I think government should facilitate the business and should facilitate the innovation, and that's what happens in Boulder a lot. Sometimes, not always, but a lot. For example, here are a list of programs that have stimulated a clean energy economy in Boulder. We have over 30 energy-related businesses in the city. And what's very interesting is a lot of folks don't know about it. Coming from Texas, and Texas is a deregulated state where we have competition, I knew about a lot of these companies down there because they did business in Texas. But they don't get to do business here. And it goes back to something that John Paul said. We have a large corporate monopoly that controls things. They are efficient in many ways, but they're not open to small business. And so things like, we passed an ordinance called Energy Smart, and it really said, it basically set some regulations around rental housing needing to be energy efficient. Now, I know a lot of folks hate the thought that government is involved in telling you how to run your rental properties, but that program has spawned many new companies in this town. In fact, one company, Energy Smart is basically an energy advisor business where someone comes in and advises you and then helps you find the resources to make the improvements to your home. And what's really interesting, it started as 2 techs in a truck. Literally, one guy would do the advising and one guy would do the work. Several years ago, under the Obama administration, we got a very large grant of about $12 million that helped that whole concept grow. And a company called Populous was formed. Populous now is owned by Clear Result. But they established an innovative business model that was so successful, and it all started here. $1 worth of rebate in Boulder generates $7.5 in capital that spawned a lot of other businesses. The services and the companies that install the new energy efficient water heaters, the people that come out and do the insulation on your house, the solar industry. You know, we have multiple solar PV businesses that started here. Namaste is one that's most well known. But because the city passed some regulations making this a solar-friendly community, it was a place that people felt like they could start a new business, and it has grown. And so there's a lot of things that happen at the local level that have expanded beyond our borders, and we forget about that because we're so used to this is a way of life for us. It's not a way of life for everybody else. We are able to, the city actually has, how many of y'all know about the Boulder Energy Challenge? Awesome. A little bit of capital. Again, this gets to the purse strings. The city has a program where they have grants and they run a competition to give a little bit of seed money to companies that want to start up either a service or a product that reduces carbon emissions. And we're about to have a new round of that. Out of that, we've had a couple of companies that have become very successful and have moved on to create bigger things within Boulder. So again, at a local level, it's a little bit of, it's policy and a little bit of capital, and you can make huge changes. The other thing that we've got going for us is we've got the labs. And the federal labs have been a great partner to the city in helping to look at innovative ways to do things. We've created a tool, it's called, I think, MaptWell. And you can go online for free and look at the solar potential of any building in the city. So you can decide whether you want to put solar on your rooftop based on how shaded it is. You can get estimates with this tool, and it's free. And that was in partnership with some of the labs in the city. So, MaptWell. And that also has generated some business around Boulder. I talked about these companies. This is a list. I know you can't read it. I'll just name a few of them. But companies like Custom Solar, Luma Solar, Namaste, Sundolier, Sunrun. Those are some of the companies that started up here and that are working here. We've got Tendril. We have Homer Energy. We have Clear Result, I mentioned already, eSource, eGauge, Navigant, Rocky Mountain, Simple Energy, Snug Home. That's just a few. And they're all local, and they're all doing great things that are going to change the way we look at energy. So if people say there isn't any money in the clean energy economy, just watch these companies. They are making a huge difference, and they will continue to. The thing that the city's looking at, and I'm just briefly going to talk about it. How many of y'all know about municipalization? Well, good, not everybody. This is where I spend my life. One of the things that the city's looking at is creating their own municipal electric utility. And it started off as really an issue around carbon reduction. Our current provider has a very carbon-intense power supply, and Boulder has some very aggressive goals. And this is another thing. If you take some risk and put some goals out there, guess what kind of businesses you'll spawn? You'll spawn the businesses that support your goals. And As we have gone on this journey for about the last 5 years in trying to form this utility, what we have learned is not just cleaning up the environment, having clean electricity, but the innovation and the economic and the people opportunities. Because what we have been able to, well, I'll tell you first of all, first thing I heard from folks is, if you could form your own utility in Boulder, will you please create a test bed for some of these new technologies? We have no place to go to do that. Now, NREL's got some great stuff, if y'all haven't heard of their test lab, but people want a place where they can showcase and see how this really works in the real world. That's something we can do. Think of what that would do to this community. Financing options. You know, one of the things we can't have today is on-bill financing. So if you want to do something with respect to energy in your home, it's kind of hard to finance that sometimes. A city can help that, help consumers. And this is where it gets to me, what's really important, and people don't talk about this in local business so much, but local business has a huge impact on all classes of residents. It provides jobs for all classes of residents, and it brings the overall standard of living for everybody up. And I think that's really important. Service offerings, that whole new business model, we'd like to break that monopoly, standard, sell more electricity, and make money model. We really would like to look at these innovative services and start reducing the amount of energy we use and make it cleaner. Pricing. One of the things that, it gets back to money. The price of things will drive the type of things you want to happen and the types of products and services. And it's really hard to change that in today's world. And lastly, we do a lot of pilots. We get some great grants because of the way Boulder is, innovation, the great things that are going on here, the creative people. We've been able to get some grants, and we can pilot some of these technologies. We've got some stuff going on right now that is so exciting. We're working with CU to look at a sustainability model and creating a microgrid. However, all we get to do is pilot. And until we own our own poles and wires, we can't take it to scale. So we have some missed opportunities there. And those are things to think about. So again, while government sometimes is evil to a lot of folks, government done right with policy and a little bit of cash can make a lot of good things happen in a community. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to talk a little bit. We just got a couple of very different but very synergistic points of view here around local economies and the importance of local economies and the role of municipal government and how we can hopefully drive a change. And very much so, I think Boulder is doing a lot of amazing things. However, I think that the real challenge is a lot deeper than we typically get to. I think that, my experience having, again, as Jeff pointed out, I worked for a large corporation for 31 years and spent the end of that time I was with them trying to understand, why is efficiency not something that's adopted? Efficiency is less expensive. Efficiency is more productive. Efficiency is inherently better. What is the fundamental reasons why efficiency does not just automatically become something that is natural to all of us? And why is it that, we tend to look at the way that our government functions and the way that we do things tends to be highly inefficient? It just didn't make sense. And I spent a lot of time trying to really figure that out. And having worked for a large corporation, when I got asked to move into smart cities, they asked me to figure out a replicable, scalable, profitable business model on smart cities. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out. And I thought it was technology barriers, I thought it was financing barriers, but at the end of the day, what I finally realized is that it's actually how we make decisions, each and every one of us. And as much as we might complain about government, government is a reflection of each and every one of us. And so when we sit down and make decisions that are basically looking at what is the lowest upfront cost option for when I want to make a purchase, I am not really looking at the full impact of that decision. I'm not really thinking about the true cost of the decision I'm making, okay? And when you look at the fundamental business models that we have built our society on, they are all very skewed towards being very isolated in the decision. So in other words, they don't take a whole systems point of view. And they tend to be extremely short-sighted, where we're only worried about the upfront cost, and very rarely do we have a mechanism or an ability to really understand the long-term costs of any one of our decisions. And quite frankly, the way that our capitalistic society is focused, it encourages that. Right? You want to push somebody to make that quick decision, that short-term decision, make that impulsive decision, buy this product, it's sitting right up here at the register, get it now, right? Instead of really being mindful about the decisions we make. And so I think a lot of the discussions that both Heather and Michael have brought up are moving us in a direction of thinking more holistically, thinking more about our decisions. However, I will challenge, and I would like to hear input from both of you, around how do we get to those fundamental ways that we function that actually undermines our ability to get sustainable change. For example, if you look at how the city does procurement, or how a city manages risk, these are all things that are meant to be focused very much on the fiduciary responsibility of a city to make good use of the money that they have, right? So you want to buy very competitively, right? You want to be able to make sure you minimize risks down to zero. The problem is that if you want to drive innovation, you're going to have a certain amount of risk. If you want to be able to make good long-term decisions, you might have to spend a little bit more, right? So how do we fundamentally get at some of these foundational issues that really underpin the decision-making that we make as a community and therefore as a city, and actually start to change that? Because otherwise we're really just kind of picking around at the edges rather than really fundamentally changing the way we think about the decisions that we're making as a community and therefore as a city. And I'll turn it over to one of you to give your thoughts.
Well, that's exactly a great point. How do we stop acting in the moment? We want everything right now. And a perfect example when I think about the energy world is when we are looking at our homes, our cars, our appliances, we really don't think about replacing that hot water heater until it breaks, right? And then you're in the moment and you don't have time because you've got an emergency. Well, one of the things we are looking at, and I think if it's successful, it will be a really good tool, is we're looking at how do you create a mechanism and a pathway for people to think long-term about critical decisions on how they spend money with respect to energy. And we're working with some local businesses to what we call our path to a fossil-free Boulder, economy, whatever. And it starts with having someone sit down with you and look at, okay, over the next 10 to 15 years, you're going to probably buy another car. You're probably going to replace some of your appliances. You may want to do some work on your house, like increase insulation. So how do you set forth a plan and really think about that and have the things in place that when you have to make that decision, you've made the thoughtful decision, and when you have that crisis, you know what it is you're going to do. It's sort of like crisis planning, only in your own home and life and with things that you make very serious spending decisions about. And so one of the things we're doing is, okay, how about replacing that car with an electric vehicle? Now, you may not need a new car in 5 years, but what does that look like? And how can we help create that whole life plan? What about the appliances? You know, it's not a decision that you want to make today. And so it's hard to think about these things today. Well, I'm not going to spend my time thinking about that because I don't need to deal with it for 5 years. But I think that is the beginning of how you become more thoughtful, again, and gain your efficiencies. Because if you've laid out a plan, when the event happens, you're ready. And you can make the right decision, and you can make those efficient decisions, and you actually end up saving money because you've prepared for it. So that's sort of in a small, personal way that I think people can think about things differently.
I'm going to come at it from a kind of meta perspective, but can someone here name the president of Switzerland? No one. Right. Yeah, Trump. Right. Good guess. So it turns out no one ever can name the president of Switzerland because the country is so decentralized that no one cares who the president is, because the president is a rotating head every 6 months, part of a 7-8 person committee. Now, you would think that a country that was that decentralized would never function properly, but in fact, it has just about the highest per capita GDP in the world. It has some of the highest social indicators. It's a very progressive country as well. It's achieved enormous environmental success. So my argument is that one of the keys that we often forget about to answer your question is giving local government the freedom to experiment. So when I say I'm a policy minimalist, I'm thinking mostly about the federal and state government. I would like to see a robust local government, and procurement is a really good example. So you gave the example, you raised the issue of procurement. We know how to do procurement in a smart way, and almost no city in the country, including Boulder, is doing it right now. And that is, when you get bids, you look at how much money of that bid is being respent in the community, how much local spending there is. And then you see how many tax dollars are generated by that, and you adjust the bid by the tax proceeds. In the absence of doing that, all procurement is highly inefficient and highly non-local right now. If you want to see an example of where they've adjusted procurement and made it more local, go to the Canadian province of New Brunswick, where the telegenic 30-something Premier Brian Gallant has overturned this old procurement regime, put in a new one that is very locally sensitive. But one of the reasons he could do that is he had permission from the federal government. It is not clear, because of constitution issues and other issues, whether local government has the permission. So I feel like we have to return to basics. We have to return to basics about how we have the freedom to do local investment institutions, local investment funds, local stock markets, all kinds of local securities that help local businesses get local finance. We're just in the very beginnings of trying to overturn the laws around all of these things. But I think it's a question of power. And once we have the power, I think we will be more innovative. And I expect we'll see it in Boulder before anywhere else.
Thank you. I think in addition to the local aspect of valuing in procurement, I think it's also critically important to look at life cycle costs, because that's the other piece that tends to get very much overlooked. You know, somebody will buy something up front, save $1, and it'll cost them $100 more over the life of that product. So, you know, if we could start to implement, I think, more localized, valuation as well as more life cycle valuation, then I think procurement could become much more sustainable and would take advantage of a lot of the efficiencies that are actually out there. So that was the one piece that I had mentioned that I think is a fundamental business model that needs to be taken a look at and reinvented within city infrastructure. The other is risk management. And risk management very much plays into what both of you had mentioned about capital, right? The ability to get inexpensive capital, the ability to invest in the local community and to attract capital. A lot of that has to do with how do you manage risk. So if both of you could comment on your thoughts around how can we maybe think about managing risk differently that would encourage local investment and also help with making more efficient business decisions?
Well, this is a really hard one for government because while Boulder is a very entrepreneurial place, as a community, fairly expect a lot of government and don't allow many, if any, mistakes. We live in a fishbowl. And so if government is allowed to say, put capital at risk, if it is not a successful venture, then heads will roll in a big way because everybody has an opinion. And so this is a really challenging thing when you're talking about government and how to, and even at a local level, to figure out ways to take the kind of risks that help support the local economy. And I think Boulder, has made some pretty good attempts, but when we don't get it right, we certainly hear about it. And I think part of getting local government to start thinking that way is, one, being willing to say, okay, you as a government have really low-cost capital. And that differential can be anywhere from 100 to 400 basis points in the market. So why not say, okay, as a government, we'll say, Boulder, you take X amount of dollars and you have this margin of error. And take that and invest it in something local in our community, whether it is a risk on creating some new device that people can put on their electric meters that stops the flow of electricity when they want it. Who knows? Something like that. But it is really looking at the economics. I mean, really, a government might be a great place to pull some capital just because it's cheaper. Now, the other thing you run into are federal and state laws that stop you from doing a lot of that. So that's, at a bigger picture, you have to change some of those. But I think being willing to say, okay, we get cheap money, is there a way to leverage that and allow enough risk for that differential and that money rate to make some, mistakes, or as they say, out of everything you try, you'll have one success. But you got to get started somewhere. That's just one idea.
So everything I know about risk is from Hunter. Actually, that came out wrong. but really, 25, 30 years ago, you were writing about the most risky thing you can do as a public entity that's concerned about energy policy is throw big chunks of money into large-scale nuclear or coal-fired plants that you never know whether or not these plants are going to be built in a timely way and what the energy demand is going to be when that happens. So what I learned is the best hedge against risk is diversification. And that's where, again, localization fits in. Figuring out how, as a community, we can stop pretending that there is a big white knight out there, some great big corporate attraction that is going to save our economy, and realize the virtue in our economy is nurturing hundreds, if not thousands, of local businesses and trying to push the limits of self-reliance across as many sectors as possible in our community. So we've talked a lot about energy, but certainly earlier we talked about food, and we could talk about small-scale manufacturing. The service economy is pretty inherently localized to begin with, but there's a lot more we could do there. And I think that there is an interesting facilitating role that local government can play with all of this. And I totally agree that getting local government to get money at a low interest rate and then putting that to work is a smart idea. The city of Santa Fe, where I'm working on another study right now, is about to create its own version of a public bank to basically borrow money at the low interest rate and make that money available to local businesses in the community as a way of growing the resilience economy. And I think you could also think about city bonds this way too. There's a wonderful new website out called Neighborly. You know about all these crowdfunding websites with equity crowdfunding, but Neighborly takes bonds and puts them in a crowdfunding format so that a city can, say, design a certain energy project or food project and do the legal work in a cost-effective way to make these bonds purchasable by your own citizens. And that way, you don't just have to raise taxes, you actually can raise the capital in a voluntary way that gets people to invest in food businesses, invest in energy businesses. So I think if we can just, let the 1,000 flowers bloom and avoid the big white elephants, we will reduce risk.
Thank you. And I do think that you bring up a really good point, because I think the idea of getting these large corporations involved makes you feel comfortable because they got deep pockets, right? And that they've got all this experience, and it helps to minimize risk. But there's clearly detractors to that as well, that you're sending all the resources from the local community out to who knows where to be distributed elsewhere. So in the context of what's going on in Boulder and with what Heather's been driving for the last 5 years, Michael in particular, what would you suggest that Boulder think about and that Heather think about as she looks at hopefully recreating an energy infrastructure essentially from scratch? I mean, with the legacy of what Excel has, but a lot of the operating thought process and way of functioning is going to be a rethink. What would be your thoughts and recommendations as Boulder moves into that?
Yeah, I think you need 100 times more money than you have right now, right? And the way we can get you 100 times more money, we talked about some of them, but right now in Colorado, there is no portal that's really operating that facilitates transactions between local investors and local businesses. Boulder could set one up. The municipality of Boulder could set one up under the Federal Jobs Act and make it easier for you to raise capital around posted energy projects. And as I said, also posting certain bond-oriented projects. I feel like if you could get more capital into this, you would see some great things.
Great. Heather?
I like your ideas. Let's get going. With respect to capital, that is a challenge. And I don't know if I have much to add to what you said, other than I do agree it's really hard in Colorado because of the structure of, I think, the state laws and other things, to do local funding. And in fact, in my organization, we've been talking about that a lot, because one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten on our project is, okay, we would love to be able to get some local money into this new utility if you ever do that. And we're trying to figure out how to do that, because face it, what we're doing is a risk. It's something that doesn't happen every day. It's new. We have a lot of money against us, and so how do you get over the risk and get the funding? And I don't really have the answers yet.
So just two more quick things. So one thing is you have a great inexhaustible resource here named Woody Tash, founder of Slow Money. If anyone can help to conceptualize how to bring more capital into your local government, that's the guy. The second thing I would say is that, to go back to the question I asked at the beginning about people with their pension funds, you have the ability to move your tax-deferred money into various local businesses and projects through two tools that you know very little about. One is called the self-directed IRA, and the other is called the solo 401k. Now, by show of hands, most people have some kind of other business that they're reporting on Schedule C. That's all you need for a solo 401k. And a solo, in a self-directed IRA, you can put away, $5,000, $6,000 a year. With a solo 401k, you can put away somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 per year in tax-deferred money that you can then reinvest locally. And unlike the self-directed IRA, you don't need a custodian to do it. there are some home run possibilities. So I think the city of Boulder should facilitate getting more people to use these tools so that you have more local capital available for your work. We're going to make you wealthy.
So, I'm going to wrap this up here, and hopefully everyone found this to be beneficial. I think the key piece I would like to, suggest everybody think about is, as we talked about, everybody's thinking differently about buying locally. Hopefully, thinking differently about, impact of their decisions. But I think the key thing also is that sometimes we have to encourage our local government that it's okay to go out there and take some risks. It's okay to go out there and try some things. It's okay to go encourage innovation. And it's not always going to work out. We need a little bit of understanding that if we're really going to push the envelope, if we're really going to try some things, then we're going to have to, as a community, come together. And because the community, again, is ultimately a reflection of the government. And if there's that permission and there is that innovation, and we reach out and look for these innovative tools that do exist, yes, there are limitations, and yes, there are barriers, and yes, there are things that will keep us from being successful. But if we focus on those limitations, we're never going to move this thing forward. But if we focus on the opportunities and we can show success, I personally believe nothing sells like success. I don't care how small the success is. If you can have a success, then that will grow, okay? So I think it's focusing on what these tools are and being able to take more of a holistic point of view and realize the impact of our short-term decisions, that they do have long-term impacts. And so that's how I would wrap it up. Any other thoughts? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.